Good to see you all. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. I just wanted to go over a couple of logistics before we start. And again, thank you for joining us this evening. I know it's starting to get to be a busy time of year. And thank you on behalf of the Noe Valley Democratic Club. And just so you understand a little bit about the format, which I think we've shared with you in advance, you're going to be doing, please, a 2-minute introduction, making your case. So you'll be talking at us for 2 minutes on why you're running. And then prior to the 2-minute mark, a bell will go off, like 30-second bell, so you know we're approaching. There it is. So you'll know. I think it's a bike bell. Thank you, Colin. Anyway, so after the 2 minutes, we'll spend about 5 minutes and I'll ask you 2 questions, David. And then again, 30-second bell will go off at that 7-minute, right before the 30-second bell will go off before that 7-minute mark. I will open it up for questions. People can do questions in the chat or they can raise their hand. If there's no burning urgent questions, I will keep going with our prepared questions until we reach the 15-minute mark. So this is designed kind of like a lightning round, and we appreciate you participating. You will then exit, and then the second person will come in, second candidate. So okay. With that, did you want to make your case? Did you want to have the floor?
I'm happy to begin. Thank you very much. Thank you again, Madam President. Thank you, Noe Valley Democratic Club. It's actually nice to be back before the Noe Valley Democratic Club as a candidate. It's been many, many years. I want to talk about 2 reasons why I believe that I'm the right choice for this very important seat. And I want to begin with the issue of experience. Nothing against the other candidates, but I believe that if you look at the experience of the people that are running, that there is no question that I'm the most qualified, not only in terms of years of experience, 8 years as a supervisor, 4 years as a county administrator, and my years as chair of the San Francisco Democratic Party, but what I have been able to accomplish during that time. Some of the most significant pieces of legislation, whether it's protecting sanctuary, having universal health care, creating Clean Power SF, creating the cultural districts, creating the legacy business program. Those are things that I authored and I made possible. And I think that the reason why so many people on the Board of Supervisors, even though I'm not on the board, are supporting me is not because they like me better, but because they believe and know that I am effective. And I think that's what I demonstrated, not only as a supervisor, as a county administrator, but also as chair of the San Francisco Democratic Party. So in terms of representing the interests of San Francisco, no one is more experienced and more effective at doing that. But the other piece is the piece of representation. I do think that representation matters. And this is a seat that has been important to the LGBTQ community. It's a seat that Harvey Milk ran for, but it's also a seat that has never elected a Latino member of the state legislature from San Francisco. I think that we need to change that. This community is a community that has been impacted disproportionately by COVID, and it is time to finally give them a voice in the state legislature. So I will leave it at that. I think that's 2 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, David. So as I mentioned, you're in the hot seat, right? So we have some questions for you. Voters, one second, sorry. Voters would like, as you can imagine, an assembly member with sound judgment. You've been Chesa Boudin's chief of staff, and many have said that the management of his office, and we're just going to dive right in here, right, was not really handled well. Again, you were chief of staff, and there have been even allegations of retaliation. I understand that you can't probably comment on those specific allegations, but I was wondering if you could speak to the management of the office, considering you were chief of staff.
Yeah, I'm very proud of the work that I've done. I think that one of the things that I bring to the table is the fact that I have been such an effective manager. I don't know the specifics of the allegations made by that judge when they talked about that specific case, but the reality is that what I brought to the office was, first of all, a more neighborhood specific focus. We created the community liaison program that assigned up to four different staff people to every supervisor district. And we also had a more hands-on approach to every single case, especially at the neighborhood level, that increased charging rates. And I think it made the office more responsive to the needs of the community. And quite frankly, I think that we also did a better job of reaching out to discrete communities as they were being impacted by crime. And I'll give you the example of the API community, the Chinese community in particular, which was the target of hate crimes. When I came into this office, there was one Cantonese speaker in the entire victim services unit. We actually hire an entire team of folks. So I am happy to debate the management results and the effectiveness of that office under my watch, because I'm very proud of it. I ran half a county before I became Chase's chief of staff. And in the last year of my tenure, I ran the entire response to COVID, which, by the way, led the effort at the regional level and in many respects the national level. So I'm very proud of that. And I think that's the kind of experience that is needed in Sacramento. And quite frankly, I think that when it comes to being operational and running an operation, no one has a better experience. And look at just how I ran the Democratic Party for 4 years.
Well,
Yeah.
Oh, no, to follow up exactly, and I feel like the direction you're going in. I was going to follow up with my second question, which is you were the DCCC chair and the chief of staff to the DA at the same time, even though there wasn't a direct conflict of interest. Some might say that you shouldn't have taken on both at the same time. I know, we wear a lot of hats in the city, but critics have also said that politics in our city are run by the same insular San Francisco family. How did you decide to take on both of those roles? And how do you plan to bring a fresh perspective to the assembly member, having served already in so many capacities?
Well, I don't know, when you say some would say who that is. The reality is that there is no conflict of interest. In fact, I've represented the Board of Education and at times the Board of Supervisors on issues of conflict of interest. I have a long history of practice in that area as an attorney. So there is no conflict of interest in having the job of being an administrator for a city department and then running being the chair of the local party. So I don't know what that is, that people are talking about. Certainly happy to discuss, what the potential conflict is. So I'm very proud of actually playing both roles. And in fact, you have people who serve on the central committee who have city jobs. Some of them are actually elected jobs, and no one has raised the issue of a conflict there. So, I would hope that in thinking about the totality of my experience, that the Noe Valley Democratic Club would be more balanced in the questions it asks, because
we have many more questions. We have many more questions up our sleeve.
The first two questions are sort of like, when did you stop beating like baby seals on the beach? It's like, listen,
I don't know if it's that extreme. I don't know if it's that extreme, but I hear you. It's a hot seat, like I mentioned. Okay, so this one's a little bit more open-ended. So in your role as VP of the California Democratic Party, you've supported other leaders who stand for equity, safety, housing, healthcare, and the environment. What is not as clear, which is it's not really negative, but just asking for you to elucidate what policy issues you would pursue if elected to the state assembly.
Yeah, someone in the chat said, do you think that non-Latinos can represent Latinos essentially? I think that everyone can represent different groups, but I do think that it's important to have representation from these communities. In terms of the policies that I would address, push forward, I think that the biggest challenge facing California and actually facing the country as a whole is inequality. It is something that impacts every area of our lives. And the inequities in our society were not created by COVID, but they were certainly exacerbated by COVID. And so that, to me, should be the challenge that is taken on by the assembly person who represents this district. And I would begin by addressing the inequality when it comes to healthcare access, which is why the first thing that I'm going to do is to push Medicare for all. I think that is something that will address the inequities, because even in a place like San Francisco, where you have a city that did better than anyone else in terms of COVID, you still have communities of color that were disproportionately impacted by COVID. I think that requires something that addresses that access, and I think single payer is the solution. The second thing that I'm going to push for is a Green New Deal. I think that we need to move away from fossil fuels, and that we need to create green new jobs, especially targeting those communities that were disproportionately impacted by COVID. And I actually have a history and experience doing that, because I created Clean Power SF, 100% renewable energy that competes with PG&E. And so I think that those are two things that require immediate attention. But something that I think is connected to addressing that inequality is the issue of education. Education is a great equalizer, is the reason why someone like me is where I am today. And I think that California is not making education the priority that it should be. We're in the bottom top 10 in per pupil spending. We should be in the top 10 countrywide. And we should make college education more accessible and affordable to Californians.
Thank you. It's nice to hear more about your platform. And I needed to shift your opinion of me and my questions, so that's good too. But David, we did want to open it up to audience questions now. And David will be, I think I haven't seen any hand raised, but
Carrie, we have some questions from the membership. So why don't I jump in? I'll just read them. For those, Mr. Campos, for those of us that believe San Francisco needs more housing, how should we think about the housing moratoriums that you introduced while you were supervisor?
Well, I think that, I have grown as an individual and learned, from some of the things that I have done. At the time that I supported the moratorium, was more in response to what community wanted in the mission. I think it was misguided. And one of the things that I'm not afraid to do is to say that was a mistake. And I think it was. I do think that we need to build more housing. But I also believe that as we push for more housing, that there has to be a greater emphasis on affordability. And that's what I think has been missing from some of the work that's been happening at the state level. I think it's good that we have efforts like SB 9 and SB 10 that expedite the building of housing, including market rate housing. But I think that to build the affordable housing that is needed to house our low income and middle income Californians, that the state has a role to play. And, I say that from my own experience, because that's what I did for many of my years in Santa Clara County, built affordable housing, by leveraging a housing bond that was passed at that county. And I think that something similar should be done at the state level. We need to have a statewide housing bond that funds affordable housing for low income and middle income Californians. I don't think that the market, if left to its own devices, will do that, because developers rightly will prioritize the housing that is the most profitable, and that often means luxury housing. And so that's what I want to focus on in California when I go there to represent this district, is to push for the building of more affordable housing.
Great. We have another question from the membership. How specifically do you propose addressing the increase in violent crime in San Francisco?
Well, I am a big proponent of community policing, have been since I was on the police commission. I think that we need to, I'm against defunding the police. I think that we need to fund law enforcement, but it has to be the right type of law enforcement. And one of the things that I think needs to happen more of is, I think there has to be more foot patrols throughout San Francisco. If you look at some of the crimes that we have seen increases of, the DA's office is actually charging 80% of some of those crimes. But the problem is that we're talking about only, less than 10% of the crimes actually being leading to an arrest. And I think that we need to have more of a presence that is connected to community. And so that's one thing that I would do. I would increase, more foot patrols. I think that community policing is the solution to an increase in crime. I also think that we need to create incentives for some of these police officers to be better connected to the neighborhoods they serve. They should speak languages. If they're serving a monolingual community, they should speak that language. And quite frankly, I think we need to do something about the fact that 70% of our police officers don't live in San Francisco. And that's where I think housing that is focusing on, on first responders is important. But I certainly have a long history of working in the area of crime prevention as a police commissioner and as a supervisor. And I think that we need a more hands-on approach that engages the neighborhoods and communities in every district.
I think there's one last question, and then we're probably up on time. Another question, do you agree or disagree with Chase's decision not to use the gang enhancement when charging?
Well, I don't believe in gang enhancements. I actually think that the current law allows you to file the maximum level of charges that is feasible. And I think that when you seek the maximum, you don't need a gang enhancement. And the history of gang enhancements is, by the way, that they are disproportionately used against people of color, and specifically men of color. I think that there is a way that you can hold people accountable without doing that. And I think that that's the right approach. And I think that's the wave of the future. If you believe that a crime should be taken seriously, the sentence for that crime should reflect that. And there is no need to use an enhancement if you're doing it the right way.
David, thank you. So when I next see you, will you accept a big hug from me or no?
No, absolutely. Listen, I don't mind tough questions. I'm a lawyer, but I also, want to make sure that there is a balance in, how you interact with a candidate. The reality is that, debate is part of being a San Francisco elected. There's nothing wrong with that,
Right.
but I think that, it's a question of like, what do you focus on when you look at a record of someone who's been in public service for so many years?
So it's so true. Yeah. And we're kind of putting everyone in the hot seat too. So I appreciate you joining us tonight. And we're not just like a sleepy little neighborhood kumbaya, but we do need to let Haney in. So thank you for your time.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Noe Valley. Take care.
Thank you. Do I see? Hi, Matt.
Hey.
Welcome. Welcome on behalf of the Noe Valley Democratic Club. Can you hear us okay?
I can, yes.
Okay, great. Sorry, we started a minute late and we went a minute over. So I just wanted to go over some of the logistics so you knew what to expect. Really quick, we're inviting you to make your case for 2 minutes. Tell us why you're running, why we should vote for you. Prior to the conclusion of your 2 minutes, a 30-second bell will go off. Colin, 30-second bell. There you go. It's kind of faint. Then I will ask you 2 questions. It'll bring us 2 or 3 to our 7-minute mark, halfway point. We'll open it up for audience questions. And people will then raise their hand or put questions in the chat. And if there are no audience questions, I will just continue. And I should know, I've been told I'm asking tough questions. So welcome into the fray, right? Prepare yourself. Okay, take it away.
Great. Well, good evening, Noe Valley Democrats. It's great to be with you. My name is Matt Haney. I born and raised in the Bay Area by a single mom. I went to public schools. I went to public university, and I've spent my whole career in public service. Last 15 years, I've worked in a variety of roles, including in the state legislature as a state Senate fellow and legislative aide. I've represented people who are facing eviction in our city. I taught at the Stanford Design School. I ran the UC Student Association working for accessible public higher education. And for the last 9 years, I have been an elected official, 6 years on the Board of Education and 3 years on the Board of Supervisors. I have been on the front lines of many of the toughest challenges that we are facing as a city and as a state. I worked to fix our broken mental health care system with Mental Health SF. I've gotten thousands of people off the streets by expanding navigation centers and housing. We built more housing in my district than any other. And I oversaw our city's budget process over the last year during the pandemic. But all of these things have taught me that we can't do this alone. We need help and leadership from the state. We are experiencing crises here in our city that require state investment, and they require our state systems and leadership. We need every city and county across the state to build housing. We need investments in public services like healthcare and education. We need to much more aggressively address our climate crisis. And I have been someone in everything that I've done who's been pragmatic, who's been effective, who's delivered, who is, yes, progressive, but also inclusive. And I think that I will be able to go to Sacramento and deliver for us. That's what we need. We have serious problems. I've been working on them my entire career. And in the state assembly, I think I can deliver for San Francisco. So I'm looking forward to your questions, and thank you.
Thank you. For some reason, everyone's square just got a little smaller, but you can see me, right? You're there. Okay. So 3 years ago, when you ran for supervisor, we're just going to jump right in here. You questioned your opponent's belief that building more housing would solve our problems. You changed your stance recently, it seems, by saying when only a small set of areas are building housing or supportive housing services, it's never going to solve the problem. That's true in our city, and should be true, even more important and true across the state. How has your thinking on housing density evolved?
Thank you for the question. I actually ran as a very pro-housing candidate when I ran 3 years ago. I passed out a flyer to 20,000 people. That was our main handout that at the very top said, build up our housing. And in my district, we've built more housing than the rest of the city by far, and affordable housing as well. I think where my position has changed is that I think that we need to be much more aggressive about getting everywhere, every neighborhood, every city and county to do their part, and that we can't, unfortunately, rely on individual neighborhoods to make their own decisions on something as important as this shared responsibility that we all have to provide for housing for people at every income level. So I am I guess I've learned, and I hope our elected officials are in the business of learning, that as my district builds housing and others unfortunately are not, and other cities and counties are not, that's not something that is going to allow us to solve our problems. The Tenderloin, for example, where I live, or south of Market, can't solve its housing problem on its own. Even if we built every building every year on every block, we wouldn't be able to meet the need. So we do need shared responsibility. And so I'm very supportive of collective efforts and state action to build more housing as well.
As a follow-up to that point, your last point about Tenderloin, which you probably could anticipate, but is still, you're very much in the hot seat here. You've been very vocal about drug dealing, drug use, and crime in the Tenderloin. You've even taken steps to increase public safety, supporting the mayor's mid-market vibrancy safety plan, backing the Hastings lawsuit to prevent tents from blocking sidewalks. But the Tenderloin, I've heard to it as a containment zone, really, for our city's sort of all the ills of the city, right? So how can voters, given that, have confidence that you could work at the state level when one of the neighborhoods in your own district remains in such distress?
Well, I'm running because the Tenderloin is in distress, and many of our neighborhoods are in distress, and we can't solve the problems of the Tenderloin just in the Tenderloin. I have gotten over 2,000 people off the streets, many of those people from the Tenderloin. And as you say, when we get 20 people off the streets on a block, 20 more people replace them very quickly. We are in many ways a reflection, not of the Tenderloin's problems, but of our state's problems and our city's failures to provide adequate mental health care and behavioral health care, addiction treatment, provide adequate housing for all of our people. And that can't happen just in the Tenderloin. So I have been on the front lines of these issues here. I think most people in the Tenderloin would tell you overwhelmingly that I've made an impact here on street cleaning, on public safety issues, on building more housing. But we would also say, and people in my district, and I'm sure this is shared across San Francisco, that we can't do it alone. And so I have experience on the front lines on all these issues, and I have an intimate knowledge of how we can address them at the hyper local level, but I also understand the urgency of addressing them with state leadership and collective responsibility.
Thank you. I think at this point we can open it up to, I see quite a few questions. David, if you want to address the chat.
Yeah, actually we have one question so far.
Okay.
I just got a second.
People are sending it to me directly.
Here's a second. So Supervisor Haney, this is from our membership. Would you call yourself a YIMBY if you are pro-housing, but you rejected housing at 450 O'Farrell just 2 months ago? Can you discuss what housing you support, if not all housing?
Well, we've built way more housing than anywhere else in my district, and I've supported the overwhelming majority of it. Most housing in San Francisco, as you know, is built in District 6, and I've been a leader in that. Thousands and thousands and thousands of units that don't end up in the newspaper that are built in my district. I think there are some projects like that 450 O'Farrell project that I didn't support the conditional use around, but that was because there was a prior version of that project that was a great project that they can still build, that I do support, that I hope that they do build. As you know, I was one of just 3 votes on the Board of Supervisors to support the project on Stevenson Street, and repeatedly, again and again and again, I've stood up for housing. We unfortunately have a situation in our city where people are, I think, saying no, and we need to be saying yes. So that's my position. And you know, I am somebody who has delivered on housing much more so than anyone else who's in office in San Francisco, on the Board of Supervisors, and I also understand firsthand that there are areas in which the state really needs to step in and really needs to require action and have goals, and the local neighborhoods should always have input. But if they dictate, unfortunately, that's often a recipe for nothing to get done.
Okay. We have another question from the membership. How do you propose dealing with people who refuse to go into shelter? Would you support dismantling encampments when shelter is available and offered? And by shelter, the person says, I don't mean necessarily permanent supportive housing for all, but homeless shelters.
I mean, you know, it is unsafe, it's dangerous, it's inhumane for people to be living out on our streets and sidewalks. And I do support efforts to bring them inside. And sometimes that's transitional, temporary shelters. You may remember I proposed to have a navigation center in every district. I wasn't able to get the support on that from my colleagues. I was the one who authored the legislation to do the shelter-in-place hotels. We got over 2,000 people inside. I worked in one of those shelter-in-place hotels myself as a disaster service worker. You know, we have to get people inside, and sometimes that's transitional shelter. I think what we saw is that most people actually will accept shelter, particularly if it's something like a navigation center or a shelter-in-place hotel. We have to change our congregate shelters so that they actually are safer, provide more privacy, more wraparound services, and they provide an actual path to get people off the streets. So yes, I support getting people out of encampments and off of our streets and sidewalks. And I think that the way to do that is to have enough transitional shelter and humane transitional shelter like our shelter-in-place hotels that really did provide a way for people off the streets, and most people accepted it.
Another question. I'm concerned about you leaving the Board of Supervisors at this critical time when the mayor can name your replacement. What led you to decide to do this at this time when there's a lot of excellent progressive candidates for the assembly role?
This is an incredibly important seat that the person who was in the assembly could represent us for over 12 years. I think we have huge challenges that we're talking about here, where I've seen, as I said, that we need larger leadership. We need leadership and support from the state. I think that I have the background and the experience, having worked on those issues here, to be able to deliver on those things at a larger level for us in Sacramento. And I would be able to do it for a longer period of time and have that opportunity. As I said, I've done a lot here and we've been successful, but the problems that we're facing in our city need leadership here, but they also need leadership in Sacramento. And I think I'm prepared to do that on not just homelessness and housing and mental health and everything, but also public education and criminal justice reform and all of that. And I have experience on all those things. So that's why I'm running. I do think that another thing just about that, District 6, the district I represent, is going to change dramatically next year. I might not even be in District 6 anymore. 30% of the district is going to have to be cut off and given to another district. And so it's going to change a lot. And I have a candidate, Haney Mahogany, who's the chair of our Democratic Party, who's going to run for District 6, and I will be very strongly supportive of Haney. So, I think preparing a successor, supporting someone who can be a successor is also a part of my responsibility, and I've also done that.
Matt, I'm going to jump in. There is an audience question that relates to one of the questions I was going to ask you. So I'm going to merge the two. So I was going to share with you, I guess, why I wanted to talk to you about climate was that I was impressed. I saw one of your flyers talked about that. And I feel like that's really a state and sort of global issue. So I was wondering, I remember when Governor Newsom called on Trump and others to come to California to see the effects of climate change if we were questioning it. So if elected, what measures would you propose to preserve the environment? Which relates to the audience question. Mr. Haney, you say there are things that need leadership from the state. What would be the top 3 pieces of legislation you would pursue in state government? I don't want to presume it's environment, but it's another hot topic. What will you pursue in state government that will pay dividends for us back here in San Francisco? This is our last question.
Great. No, I appreciate the questions. So on your first part, this is the existential threat that we face as a state, and we do need state and national and international leadership on the issue of climate. Certainly, we are a reflection of what it looks like when we don't take it seriously enough, and our state is on fire, every year, and we're going to continue to feel the impacts of it. I think there's a couple things. One is we got to stop doing the bad stuff. No more fracking, no more oil exploration, no more oil permits. Really move much more aggressively with clean energy standards when we build. We have to make it, and then we have to start doing more of the good stuff. That means we have to make it easier to build clean energy infrastructure. There are still far too many times when people try to build wind or solar and they get shut down at the local level. Similar to what we see with housing, it's still a huge issue where we aren't able to build that infrastructure across our state. Similar to that, we have to change the way that we live. So we need high-speed rail. We need to build housing and increase density near where people work and near transit. We have to have rebates for people to buy e-bikes and transition much more aggressively to address our emissions in cars. So those are things that I would do that I think that there were a number of bills on that got held up because of, in many cases, the oil industry stopping them. And so we need to be more aggressive on those things. Some of those things would be in my top areas. I talked about those. I want to make it easier to build clean energy infrastructure and not allow those to get stopped by NIMBYism. I think it's been a big issue, and there's legislation that can move that. I do similarly think that we need to have goals and standards for homelessness services in every city and county. We have RENA goals for housing. We need to have a similar set of goals that are required for every city and county to build homeless shelters and treatment beds and navigation center beds, transitional shelters. Because when they don't have those, they all come here, or they come to the few places they are, they end up under our freeways. The other thing that we need to do is we need billionaires and big corporations to pay their fair share. We need a significant wealth tax or a version of a CEO tax like the one that I authored here, and have that to increase our revenue and invest those revenues into schools. That's a critical thing. Our school district is struggling right now. We need more funds for our schools, and I think there are plenty of billionaires, big corporations, and companies that don't pay their workers enough, like what we did in the overpaid executive tax. I would work to do a similar tax at the state level and invest that in schools.
Matt, thank you. Thank you for your time. We're going to say goodbye to you, and we're going to welcome Bilal. So thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it. All right. Okay. Bye.
Bilal, welcome. You can make yourself known and seen if you'd like. Up
Hey,
there.
everyone.
I love the backdrop.
Also the pin.
Oh, I didn't even see that. And I forgot to wait. Oh, I have this one. Love Trump's hate. I have some Pelosi ones are on here too. Okay. So you are in the hot seat. We can't forget that, even though it sounded like I was being very friendly to you. I've been told I'm asking tough questions. So we're going to continue in that same vein. So before we start, I'm just going to go over a couple of logistics and ground rules. We're going to invite you to make your case for 2 minutes prior to the 2-minute end conclusion. 30-second bell will go off. We'll then move to 2 to 3 questions, probably 2 from me to the halfway point, which is about 7 minutes. Again, a 30-second bell will go off. We'll open it up to audience questions. That will be either, it's mostly been through the chat, but people might also raise their hand and like to be called on. If there are no audience questions, we will continue with my prepared ones. And prior to the 15-minute mark, again, a 30-second bell will go. So you have the floor, Bilal, if you'd like to do your 2-minute pitch.
Thanks, Carrie, and thanks everyone at the Noe Valley Democratic Club for being here on a Wednesday evening. Excited to chat. For those who don't know me, my name is Bilal Mahmood. I'm a neuroscientist, a civil servant, and an entrepreneur. And I'm running for state assembly because I do believe San Francisco is a beacon of hope for the middle class, for people trying to break into the middle class, for immigrants and migrants and LGBTQ+, anyone searching for a better life. Because it's personal for me. I'm the child of immigrants and migrants. It's the story of San Francisco. My parents left the dictatorship to move here. We had 3 generations of us in a single bedroom apartment when we started. My mom took public transit every day and fought for our ability to get to the best public schools. And she eventually became a librarian herself. And we were eventually able to break into the middle class because of my mom's struggles and my dad's innovation. And if you distill it down, it's those 3 things, housing and schools and security, that enabled my parents to succeed here that they wouldn't be able to where they came from. And those are the 3 facets of the middle class, of the priorities of our campaign. It's a priority because the dream of the middle class is disappearing. We see it all around us every day. Over the last 2 years, the number of unhoused has doubled. The number of opioid deaths is twice as the number of COVID deaths. The number of burglaries have increased by double digits. Thousands of children have lost from our public school system, resulting in a budget deficit. And we cannot forget there's a climate disaster, which has a ticking time bomb of 5 to 8 years, which is gonna be a powder keg on the underlying systemic issues that I just mentioned. So we, unfortunately, in my opinion, cannot rely on the politicians who got us here to help us get out of it. And that's why I'm running for state, to bring new experience and leadership and courage to the office. I've worked as a scientist at Stanford Medical School. I was an analyst for President Obama, helping thousands of small businesses in the Jobs Act, as an entrepreneur in the nonprofit and private sectors. And I feel that we need to bring forth new solutions from those combination of experiences in science and technology and policy. Those things solve the pandemic. They're going to solve climate. They're going to solve housing. They're going to solve healthcare. So we need to bring new ideas and new solutions. We don't have a money problem in San Francisco. We have an ideas problem. And so we have new solutions like the Built for Zero system to solve homelessness in San Francisco, to ensuring that we aggressively go after fentanyl dealers who are preying on our streets, to supporting victims of crime and when our city governments will not, and ensuring that we hold our leaders accountable like we will with the school board recall in February.
Thank
and
you. Hello, that was more than 2. Do you want to finish your sentence, or is there a new thought?
I know, just happy to dive more detail into those policies and components in the course of this presentation, and yeah, excited to chat.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to start with my questions. You are in the hot seat, just a reminder. So to draft bills, you must work with powerful interest groups, communities, and colleagues with different priorities than your own. You have to build broad coalitions, and often these are built through relationships and trust. 2 of your opponents have significant experience as legislators and many years of civic involvement, coalition building. Why should voters believe that you have the experience or relationships needed to be successful as a state legislator?
Yeah, is there a time limit on the question, on the answers to these questions as well?
So we have basically a 5-minute, I don't think you're going to take 5 minutes to answer, but we have that and then the halfway point, and then we'll open it up for audience. Yeah.
Sounds good. So I think I'll comment that let's look at, there's a question of the record of our opponents, and then there's a question of how we build coalitions. I think on the first facet, If we look at the records of our opponents, on one hand, David Campos is an obstructionist on housing, so he doesn't seek to build coalitions. And on the other hand, you have Matt Haney. Look at the 469 Stevenson project. That should have been a slam dunk of a housing project. He couldn't build a coalition on our very small board of supervisors. How is he going to build a coalition on an assembly of 80? So I don't think our opponents have a track record of building coalitions. They actually have a track record of failure. And we see that in the outcomes of our city. How do you build coalitions? The type of coalitions that we need to build in the next decade are going to require scientists and technologists and policy people working together. That's the type of coalition. When I worked in the President Obama's administration to pass the Jobs Act, this was coming out of the financial crisis. We had to build coalitions between industry, as well as policy people, as well as small business interests, as well as nonprofits. And we saw that from all across the world. And I think the type of coalition we need to build to solve things like climate. We can't solve climate change in California because there's oil and gas unions that own our politicians and our Democrats. And so that's how we need to build new coalitions with technology that I have relationships with moderate Democrats and in the state legislature through different government groups I'm a part of as well. We'll bridge those together to actually build new coalitions that are necessary to solve the challenges ahead.
Great. Second question. This is designed more for like lightning round, as I should have mentioned. In 2018, Senator Wiener proposed SB 50, which would have eliminated some local control over housing and potentially led to much more development in Noe Valley. If proposed again, would you support it?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'll keep going. Every 8 years, the state's math curriculum framework is updated, as you know. The most recent revision de-emphasizes calculus and pushes algebra back to 9th grade. You've publicly indicated support for 8th grade algebra. Would you support a bill that mandates local districts offer 8th grade algebra to public school students?
Absolutely. And I think I kind of qualify answer as well, or just give context. Like I took 8th grade algebra in my own public school. I'm a product of the public school system. I took 8th grade algebra. It's deeply important. And I think by eliminating that option, we further spread the inequities in our system. One of our opponents is the one who implemented the removal of 8th grade algebra in San Francisco. And I think there's a risk to that being implemented going forward. And if we eliminate that, it's going to further the divide in our cities. And we need to ensure that that option is available for everyone. And I'll fight for that. This is why this election is so critical. Decisions like this are going to be made at the state that affect every city and county in the state.
I'm not 100% sure if we're at audience questions yet. Colin, how are we for timing?
We've got about 30 seconds left, so probably can move on to audience.
Okay.
Yeah, we've got Carrie. We've got a few from the audience. So, first is, what are your thoughts, Bilal, on the school board recall?
I'm, I believe, the only candidate that supports the recall of all 3 school board members. I've been supporting it since day one. I got 16 signatures with Kit Lamb out in the streets from the summer, and been donating to. And I think the primary thing is that one, Collins is like affirmatively a racist, and that should be held accountable. But 2, they kept our schools closed when they should have been opening them. They were prioritizing future political careers over the jobs they had today, and I think that should be held accountable. We can't let people use our political system as stepping stones. We have to focus on people who are going to do the job they're elected for. And they did not, I was talking to a student earlier this week. She was telling me how in SFUSD, students are not allowed to use Wikipedia. And our own school board was using Wikipedia to make decisions about the entire school district. There's such a deep irony in that fact. And we need to hold our elected leaders accountable to the same standards we set our students to. And they clearly are not meeting their needs.
Okay. There's another question about, why are you running for this state role and instead of making kind of San Francisco and local politics your focus?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of reasons. One, I think I'm most qualified for state rather than school board. I think the problem of starting at the stepping stone is, like, for instance, most people start at the school board. I'm not a parent. I don't have a background in education, and I don't want to use it as a stepping stone. I want to focus on the job we have today. I do think the state is the best place to make the impact for San Francisco. And examples of that are climate change. The way California is the 5th largest economy in the world, we can make massive legislation like green loans and a public bank, and re-architecting our government. Like, I've worked with AOC's former chief of staff and campaign manager who authored the Green New Deal to develop a plan for California. You can only do that in California. In San Francisco, it takes 7 years and $350 million to build one bus lane. How do we make all bus lanes more faster? You can do AB 629, which is a bill that David Chu introduced for seamless transit, which would make accelerated transit infrastructure for all of the Bay Area and San Francisco. For housing, if you have a board of supervisors, it's going to block every housing every time a new housing development happens. Only the state can apply the pressure and remove that micromanagement that the city councils and the supervisors have to enable us to build more housing in any capacity. I'm a firm affirmative YIMBY in that context as well. And so I think because our supervisors and our city is so obstructionist, the state is the place to have the best impact in the very limited time we have left to deliver on the outcomes we need from our city for housing, for schools, for transit, for climate, for security. When we have district attorneys and electeds who don't hold victims' rights to the forefront and don't hold perpetrators accountable, this is why the state is the best lever to actually put pressure to get the outcomes that we need at the city.
Well, thank you. I'm just going to follow up to one of the statements you just made, housing. Actually, and I think you might have said safety, but I'm going to go from there. Some of your recent public statements could be interpreted as San Francisco needing to get tougher on crime. And actually, I think the mayor called it tough love today. Specifically, do you support increasing the size of our police force? Would you support longer sentences for property crime than we have today?
Yeah, so I think my framework on the police presence is that I don't believe in the defund the police movement. Wholeheartedly. I do not believe in defund the police. I don't necessarily think you need to increase the number of police, but what statistically was amazing about the mayor's proposal is there are Harvard economic studies and there are textbooks written that the best way to deploy police is targeted patrols. That's what the mayor is proposing. She's proposing that you have targeted patrols and high intensity and very high frequency interactions that has statistically been shown to reduce crime in high risk areas. It's been shown for decades to do that. That's why her proposal is actually statistically sound to drive. That is what I'm in favor of, is increasing the overall number of police presence in these high risk areas, and that can actually reduce the reduction in crime. Second, we do think you need to increase the rate of the rate of prosecution and the level of prosecution of the crime of certain things like fentanyl. I do think fentanyl should be charged as manslaughter because it effectively is manslaughter when 70% of people who take it don't know that they're taking fentanyl and as a result they overdose. And so you need to raise the frequency of prosecution and you also need to raise the rate. And so I do think one of the major problems with the district attorney is a concept called disposition rates. He's not charging the crime proportional to the crime committed. There's been 400 anti-Asian hate crimes this year, and so many of them have never been charged as a hate crime, and they're kind of all let go on mental health leave. And so that is actually one of the primary problems is we're not charging the crimes commensurate to the crime that was committed. And that's what we need to change. That's going to be more of a city issue, but at the state, we can actually then do other frameworks like you mentioned.
I think we have time for one more question, if I'm correct. So another big umbrella topic, while homelessness is more of a municipal issue than a state one, at least that we feel it more that way here in San Francisco, there are still things the state could do to help San Francisco's homelessness challenges. Why has San Francisco struggled for so long with homelessness? And what would you do as a legislator to help?
That's another example of something that I feel that the state, that's why I'm running for state. I think the state can actually solve this problem. I firmly believe that homelessness is not a money problem, it's an ideas problem. And the solution that we're proposing is called the Built for Zero system. It has solved chronic homelessness in 14 US cities across the country. And we want to bring it to San Francisco through a public-private partnership that's been leveraged in these 14 other cities. What it involves is creating these giant command centers between public and private partnerships, monitoring data collection. I'm sure everyone's read the Heather Knight article that showed Jessica and her mother and trying to find her. If you look through that article, there's 3 things you can take away. It's impossible to find Jessica, to find her, to get help. Her mother found her 10 times in 100 days. So how can you help someone if you don't know where they are? So this creates a real-time census data style collection system to know where every unhoused is, what is their health status, what is their names. It's been highly effective. The second component is you have personalized care. One-to-one counseling that customizes a care program for every individual because people are homeless for 4 to 5 different reasons, often causal and correlated together. If you combine those 2 elements together, it goes beyond housing first, it goes to housing plus. And so this has worked in Bakersfield, it should work in San Francisco. And that's what we want to do, is boost the funding for these types of public-private partnerships called the Built for Zero system. It's been highly effective. We can fund that from the state and bring it to different counties across California, including San Francisco and in LA, where we have the highest incidence of homelessness. And that's how we'll solve the crisis. And we fundamentally have not had this system has actually existed for years. Politicians have had years to execute this if they wanted to, but they haven't. And so that's what our campaign is about, bringing new ideas to the state, because our city and local government will not act to ensure that we solve the outcomes that we need in a very critical period of time that we have left.
Excuse me. I don't know if you have time for this. Well, let's just, there's one chat. We can do it like a minute.
Sure.
What are some of the other frameworks that could be implemented on the state level to improve public safety in San Francisco, considering that the prosecution rate and disposition rate are only subject to local control? Okay, 1 minute or less.
Absolutely, yeah. So they are subject to local control. So one thing we can do is actually, we feel that we need to increase funding to go after the supply of crime. So the supply chain of crime is people who actually steal, and then there's people they sell it to. So the state, through federal and state partnerships, we can go after cartels, drug rings, and organized crime that are actually doing a lot of these things. I've been volunteering on safety patrols. We kind of note that there's these like Audi thieves. They break into other Audis and they steal it and they leave in their own Audi. So these are organized crime units that are breaking into our cars, breaking into our houses, breaking and invading into our space. And so we need to go after these fencing networks that actually that the people sell their goods to, and go after these organized crime units, and the state and the federal governments can actually partner on that. Similarly with fentanyl as well. A lot of fentanyl is distributed through doctors illegally. I've talked to the Attorney General's office about this, and we can boost funding for that. But second, it actually comes in from cartels from Mexico and China. The precursors come in. So we tackle the organized cartels and the organized crime rings that are actually distributing the drugs that are feeding onto our street, as well as the ones that are the supply of the demand for the crime. We can actually cut crime at its source. And that's what we can do at the state.
Thank you. Bilal.
Yeah, sounds good.
I think we're good. I mean, you naturally concluded. Thank you. Thank you for your time. And we will welcome Thea, our last candidate.
Take care, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thea, welcome. Thank you. You want to unmute yourself?
Unmuted.
You are our fourth, technically last, but not forgotten. We are a little off our perfect 15-minute time frame here. But I just wanted to go over a sort of logistics and what you could expect. We're inviting you to make your case for 2 minutes. Prior to the initial 2-minute mark, a 30-second bell will ring. I will then ask 2 minutes for, I'll ask 2 questions for about, I'm sorry, I'm like hitting buttons I shouldn't be hitting. I will ask 2 questions. We will hit approximately the 7-minute mark. A 30-second bell will go off before the midway point. We'll open it up for audience questions, and people will either raise their hand and speak, or in the chat function, which we primarily have been relying on. And if there are no audience questions, I will keep going with our prepared questions for you for a total of 15 minutes. So if you'd like to start, you have the floor. This is your 2-minute introduction.
Okay, and just to clarify, so I get there's gonna be a ding, ding, ding at 1.5 minutes. Is that right? So I just keep going at that point?
There'll be a ding prior to the 2-minute mark. So you'll
Okay.
And then through the halfway
But
mark.
I can keep going for another 30 seconds after that.
Right.
Okay, terrific. Okay, are we ready? Turning on my thing as well. Here we go. Hi, my name is Thea Selby, and I'm running for Assembly District 17, and I would be honored with your endorsement. Noe Valley is a beautiful and much revitalized neighborhood with your town square and your fabulous farmers market and the newly reinvigorated Noe Valley Democratic Club, which I congratulate you all for. All neighborhoods in San Francisco deserve what Noe Valley has. They deserve safe streets, they deserve good schools, they deserve fair and enough housing, and they deserve good community. I'm running for AD 17 because I see the highs and lows in this district. I see places like the Tenderloin that are treated like a containment zone where anything goes, and I see the beauty of North Beach right there. I see how Chinatown has suffered with the anti-Asian hate, and I see how Dogpatch has flourished. My 2 main platforms are to make sure we have the San Francisco we can all be proud of. First, through opportunity for all, through great public education from K through 16, and then meeting or exceeding the climate goals, whether through building housing or better public transportation. I'm a mom. I've raised 2 kids in the district. They went through the public school system here. So I have firsthand experience of what it's like to raise a family here. And I think we need families here. I'm a small business owner, and I want to make sure that we take care of our unique businesses that make San Francisco what it is post-COVID. And I'm a city college trustee who has been elected twice citywide. And I've worked for the past 7 years to first get us out of the accreditation crisis, then balance our budget and hire a permanent chancellor with a CPA to get us back to fiscally thriving. I would be honored with your endorsement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thea. So we've been told we're asking tough questions. So you are in the hot seat. The first one isn't as crazy. Depends how you think about it.
Okay.
You stated that you're the only woman in the race for the state assembly and would be the first woman from our community to represent us in 20 years. Do you believe that being a woman makes you uniquely qualified for this role? And if so, why?
Okay. That doesn't seem so tough to me. Yes, I think everybody brings something to the table. Let's first say that one of my hallmarks, how I like to think about things, I'm the daughter of 2 anthropologists, is, I like to celebrate difference. I like to celebrate diversity. And unfortunately, we are now at 27% female in the assembly. We have 50% of our population is female in California, as it is in most of America. And I think that the more we have diversity, whether it's making sure that we have women of all kinds in the assembly, then the better off we are, the better legislation we'll have. I mentioned raising kids in the district, and I actually do think that makes a difference. I've heard my colleagues talk about education, and they're talking about it from a very theoretical standpoint, not being a PTA vice president, for 4 years of my school. And I do think that gives me a different perspective on what education means. I have raised my family here, and I think there are many other things that are going on with women right now that it would be really helpful to have a woman in office. Among them, of course, we're at a very difficult point for COVID. Women have suffered disproportionately. I see this with our city college students, where women have dropped out because they're taking care of their parents and they're taking care of their kids at the same time, and education is taken a back burner. So I think it will be helpful for women's issues. I think it'll be helpful for my experience, just because I will, maybe I'll get it up to 29% of the assembly if I get in there. And the more diversity we have in legislature, the better.
Okay. I do have a follow-up.
Good?
Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah.
To draft bills, you must work with powerful interest groups, communities, and colleagues with different priorities than your own. You have to build coalitions, and often these are built through relationships and trust. 2 of your opponents have significant experience as legislators and many years of civic involvement. Why should voters believe that you have the experience or relationships needed to be successful as a state legislator?
Great question. And let me start with what I've been doing over the past 3 years. I have built a coalition that is 95,000 members strong. It is made up of, and it's not just me, obviously, but I'm one of the co-founders. I'm very proud to be a co-founder of Voices for Public Transportation, which just actually went in front of the Metropolitan Transportation Commission a few days ago, and is a major player now in what will be, we hope, the 2024 transportation regional funding measure that will be progressive. So how did I do this? I did this by first of all, talking to everybody. You can't talk to just the left or just the right, in my opinion. You need to talk to everybody, and that is a hallmark of who I am. I have friends that are progressive. I have friends who are moderate. I actually have my consultants who are moderate and progressive. I like to get to yes. I like to figure out, how do we get to yes? My example was when people were talking about what happened in Stevenson, and my quote in the paper was, it's easy to say no. We can figure out how to say no. We're always able to say no. We need to get to yes. At City College, we actually negotiated 2 different housing projects. One of them 33 Goth, the other at Balboa Reservoir. And they're 50% affordable, and they're going to be over 1,000 units each. So these are some of the things that I've done that I'm very proud of. So I believe it's a combination of building coalitions, which I'm able to do, working on both sides of the aisle, and then getting things done.
Thea, thank you. I have a follow-up to, I think you invoked City College.
Good.
So you were elected to City College's Board of Trustees in 2014, serving as both vice president and president. Over the last decade, City College experienced, as you know, a significant decrease in enrollment, yet didn't cut expenses to reflect that lost income, resulting in near insolvency. How can voters feel confident that you would exercise sound fiscal decision-making in your next role? As a follow-up, looking back at your tenure at City College, would you do anything differently?
Again, great questions. And let's start with the first one, which is basically, how can you trust me? Well, first of all, you should know that I am the fiscal hawk of the group. Anybody who has watched a City College board meeting will know that for, I think, good, but some would say for not good, I ask a lot of questions. I am very comfortable with budgets. You know, I have an MBA, and I feel often that there is not enough questioning that's going on with the budget. So one thing you will know is that I'm very comfortable with budgets, and actually we are solvent, and I kept us from insolvency. And the way I did that is making very hard choices. And when I say I'm saying I because I'm running for assembly, but it's we. We are a group. We're a group of 7. And I would say, you know, some of the things that we were able to do that the Board of Ed was not is work together and make very difficult decisions. So recently, the AFT, our union of faculty, agreed to a pretty massive cut in their salaries. And that was a necessary thing to balance our budget. And we did not back down. We did not say this can't happen. We said this is something that has to happen because ultimately City College is such a gem for the students. We cannot lose it. And we're going to have to make these difficult choices. So that's what I would say to you in terms of why me. I have been tempered by City College. It has not been easy. I will be absolutely frank with you about that, but we have made the tough decisions. We have kept the college afloat. We will unfortunately probably have to continue to make the tough decisions. And you can actually talk to Phil Ting about this because I think he feels very strongly that I'm a good City College trustee for exactly that reason.
Well, we're talking to you about it. So thank you. I have a couple more questions for you. This one I feel like on the surface is petty, but it gets to a really big public safety issue. The governor's administration announced a new indoor mask mandate, which goes into effect today through January 15th. Considering that you were late to be vaccinated, which cast some doubt on your own vaccine position, can you tell us how you would support vaccine policies or other COVID safety measures if elected?
Absolutely. So first, just to explain for those of you who don't know, I had COVID. And my doctor asked me not to get vaccinated for 6 months, and I got vaccinated 3 months after I had COVID. So for those of you who don't know, just to be clear, there was I had an appointment to get vaccinated the week that I got COVID. So there was no necessarily hesitation on my part. The second thing I will talk about is City College. We have a mandate at City College. And I think it's very important for us at everywhere to recognize that we have to be safe. I don't think it's petty at all. I think, you know, there's a lot of fear. There's a whole lot of fear in this city, and people have died. I mean, we've had a lot of deaths. So what we did at City College is we created a mandate where you actually go into a system, and we do have some exceptions, but actually most of those people are not going to school yet because our classes are mostly not in person. So I support that mandate. In fact, I was the only trustee to say, I want to hear how that mandate is going. And this is something that is, I think, true for me and not true for a lot of people. I take things very, very seriously, and I want to know the consequences of them. So it's one thing to have a mandate or a mask mandate or whatever kind of mandate it is, but I also want to follow up and say, how is it going? And so I was the trustee who said, I want the report. Are the teachers vaccinated? Are the students getting vaccinated? And indeed, we got that report. So I think one thing you'll find about me is I take these things seriously, and I care deeply about the follow-up, the consequences, the outcomes.
Well, we have another serious topic, another question, so thank you.
Yeah.
While homelessness is more of a municipal issue than a state one, there are still things the state could do to help San Francisco's homelessness challenges. Why has our city struggled for so long with homelessness, and what would you do as a legislator to help?
So homelessness is it's a crisis here in San Francisco. And, you know, I happen to have a client in my day job. I have a small company, as I mentioned, and we do marketing, communications, and outreach. And one of our clients is in another county, and they are working on eradicating homelessness in their own county and doing a pretty good job of it. And some of the things that I've learned as a result of that are that housing first is a philosophy that many of us have, but we don't have the housing to actually do it. So one of the first things that I would like to do is make sure that we have a housing mandate of 82,000 units. In it, of course, there are over 40% of them are affordable. We need to make sure that we have transitional housing, and that can be done quite quickly in some places. I was just speaking with a woman in North Beach, and I don't know if you guys remember, there's this bus. It's like a giant warehouse, and it's got the word bus in it. I remember it because way back when it was a furniture shop, and I bought something from it. Well, those are empty. There are a lot of empty spaces in San Francisco. So in addition to making sure that we're doing our housing through transitional housing and things like that, we need to be taking empty spaces and we need to be using them. Whether they are, it's been 20 years that place has been empty. I have a place on my block that's been empty for about 15 years. So I think that's the second thing we can do. And then the third thing that we absolutely can do is the supportive services that we all know and love and our San Francisco values. We don't have enough beds. We don't have, we can have a 72 hours that you can have somebody in a hospital or something, but we don't have a place for them to go after that. So I think we absolutely need to rebuild our social services and mental health systems so that the addicted people can get what they need, the mentally ill people can get what they need, and then the largest group of people who are homeless are people who have lost their jobs or their jobs don't make enough to get them paid. Veterans, for example, at City College often sleep in their homes, and they do so because the housing is so expensive. So starting with housing first, and then working on the spaces that are empty that maybe we can repurpose, and then working on the social services that we know and love and care so much about here in San Francisco.
Thea, thank you. That is time. We appreciate your participation. Wait, sorry. Super quick question, 30 seconds or less. Thea, if this race doesn't work out, will you continue your good work at CCSF?
Well, thank you for that compliment. And this is what I say: one race at a time, one race at a time. So let's talk a little later about that, but thank you.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Is that it for the whole time?
So I think that we're going to, that is it. Yep. And Rohit will welcome you out to the waiting room and goodbye, or you can end it yourself.
Oh, well, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. You take care, everybody. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. And I just wanted to say thank you to all of you for spending your Wednesday evening with us. And I hope you found it valuable and that the lightning round worked. Look forward to your feedback and have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you so much. This was fantastic.
Oh, good. Thank you. Okay, great. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Send the compliments in the chat. I will accept them. Okay, bye and thank you.